On November 20th, 2006, two women walking along a dirt access road behind the Golden Key Motel in Egg Harbor, Township, New Jersey, made a grim discovery. Around 3:00 p.m., they noticed what appeared to be human remains lying in a drainage ditch. Their call to police triggered an investigation that would uncover a chilling scene. Responding officers soon located 3 additional bodies nearby, bringing the total to 4. All of the women were positioned face down, their heads uniformly pointed east. They were fully clothed but without shoes, and their states of decomposition varied, suggesting different times of death. The deliberate arrangement raised immediate suspicions of intentional placement, pointing investigators toward the likelihood of a serial offender. Over the following week, authorities confirmed the identities of the victims. There were 20-year-old Molly Dilts, 42-year-old Barbara Breidor, 23-year-old Tracy Roberts, and 35-year-old Kim Raffo. Each woman's toxicology results revealed troubling substances. Barbara tested positive for heroin, while Kim and Tracy showed cocaine. Molly's system only revealed alcohol. Cause of death, however, was confirmed for just 2 victims. Tracy Roberts died from asphyxia and Kim Raffo from strangulation. Barbara and Molly decomposition obscured definitive conclusions. Investigators theorized that intoxicants may have been used to weaken or control the women before their deaths. The discovery shocked the Atlantic City community, exposing a grim pattern of violence. Bound by tragic similarities, addiction, prostitution, and vulnerability, the 4 women became the center of an investigation that promised to reveal a far darker truth. Barbara Breidor was born on June 5, 1964, in Huntingdon Valley, Pennsylvania, into what relatives described as a prestigious, well-to-do family. She grew up in a stable household with siblings and attended Catholic school, where her intelligence was quickly recognized. Known for a quick wit, bright smile, and sharp memory, Barbara had a remarkable ability to recall facts with ease. Family members often joked she could one day become a champion on Jeopardy! Her academic promise was evident, and those around her believed she had limitless potential. Barbara pursued higher education at Penn State University, where she studied for 2 years. Although she did not complete her degree, her intellect and charm remained defining qualities. She returned home and began working for her mother, who owned a Santa Fe trading company. This period marked one of stability, where she remained close to family and actively contributed to their small business. However, life soon shifted dramatically. The death of her father in the early 1980s left a deep emotional impact, one that friends later described as a turning point in her outlook. Years later, in 2000, Barbara faced another devastating loss when her half-brother passed away, compounding her grief and weakening the sense of security she once carried. When her mother sold the family business and relocated to Florida, Barbara made the choice to stay behind in the Atlantic City area. She found work as a cocktail waitress at the Copacabana Casino Hotel on the boardwalk. There, she entered into a long-term relationship with Steve Frizzell. Despite moments of hope, the tragedy she endured gradually destabilized her life, leaving her increasingly vulnerable. This contrast between promise and hardship provides critical insight into the circumstances that shaped her path. Barbara Breidor's struggle with addiction began in 1998 with what seemed like a small choice. She took a pain pill prescribed to her boyfriend, Steve Frizzell, to relieve menstrual cramps. The relief soon turned into dependence, and Steve followed the same path. When the prescriptions ended, the couple turned to heroin, beginning a spiral that would define the next chapter of their lives. By 2001, their drug use had intensified to the point where raising their daughter became impossible. They made the difficult decision to send Dominique to live with Barbara's sister, Valerie Ansey, in Florida. It was a choice shaped by desperation rather than neglect, reflecting how far addiction had eroded their ability to provide stability. Within less than a year, Barbara found herself on the streets of Atlantic City, supporting her habit through prostitution. Her descent was documented in police records. She was arrested multiple times for soliciting, including at least 2 instances, where the officer involved had been undercover. These convictions resulted in short periods of jail time, but they did little to break the cycle. Each arrest only highlighted how deeply entrenched she had become in drugs and survival sex work. The situation worsened in 2002 when Steve was arrested on burglary and drug possession charges. Without him, Barbara's drug use escalated further. Friends and relatives reported that her heroin addiction expanded into crack cocaine, making recovery increasingly unlikely. By the time of her death in 2006, Barbara was living with a friend named Lori and Lori's father, Richard Adams. In exchange for food and shelter, she performed household chores, a stark contrast to the life of promise she once had. Addiction stripped her of stability, family connections, and ultimately made her profoundly vulnerable. The Golden Key Motel, situated on Black Horse Pike in Egg Harbor Township, was far from a welcoming stop for travelers. By the early 2000s, it had gained a reputation as a place frequented by transients, sex workers, and drug users. Its peeling paint, dimly lit walkways, and constant stream of short-term visitors created an atmosphere of neglect and decay. This environment made it an easy backdrop for activity that thrived away from close scrutiny. Behind the motel stretched a marshy dirt access road, overgrown and damp, leading away from the main highway. It was here, in this isolated stretch, that the bodies of Barbara Breidor and 3 other women were discovered. The remote location, shielded by reeds and uneven ground, ensured the victims remained hidden until authorities began their search. When investigators scoured the scene, they noted the absence of the usual evidence. No murder weapon surfaced, no personal belongings lay scattered, and no clear forensic trail remained. The bodies themselves were the only markers of what had happened. Their arrangement, however, raised immediate suspicions. Each woman was found lying face down, barefoot, with her head pointed east. The deliberate positioning suggested more than coincidence, leading authorities to consider whether the placement carried symbolic meaning or represented a ritualistic signature by the killer. Toxicology results provided further context. All 4 women bore signs of drug use, consistent with the dependencies that had shaped their lives. Investigators theorized that the perpetrator might have taken advantage of those addictions, either by supplying substances or exploiting their impaired states to subdue them before the killings. The Golden Key Motel thus became more than just a location. It stood as a stage where vulnerability met violence, in a setting notorious for vice and largely ignored by the outside world. The investigation into the murders near the Golden Key Motel began with a focus on the likelihood of a local predator. Investigators reasoned that whoever was responsible understood both the geography of the area and the vulnerabilities of women living on the margins. The secluded marshland behind the motel suggested familiarity, pointing to someone who knew it provided concealment while remaining close enough to the main road for easy access and escape. One of the first significant names to emerge was Terry Olson, a guest at the Golden Key Motel during the period when the murders occurred. His presence at the location made him an immediate person of interest. Olson cooperated with authorities, providing DNA and hair samples, and even volunteering to take a polygraph test. Despite this, none of the forensic evidence collected from the scene matched him. Investigators also learned of troubling allegations from his ex-girlfriend, who accused him of violent tendencies and claimed she had reported concerns about his behavior to authorities. Yet, in the absence of direct evidence linking him to the crimes, the case against him stalled, and he was never charged in connection with the murders. Years later, the investigation took on a new dimension with the arrest of Rex Heuermann, identified as the Long Island serial killer in 2023. The brutality of the Gilgo Beach murders prompted authorities to explore possible links between Heuermann and the Atlantic City case. They reviewed timelines, compared the victims' profiles, and examined similarities in disposal methods. While the idea of a connection drew public attention, investigators ultimately ruled it out. The differences in geographic focus, forensic evidence, and established patterns suggested the murders at the Golden Key Motel were not part of Heuermann's series. Beyond these leads, investigators canvassed the area extensively. They interviewed motel staff, nearby residents, and known associates of the victims. They traced the women's last known movements, hoping to identify who they'd been with before their deaths. Despite these efforts, the investigation repeatedly returned to the same frustrating conclusion. There was no conclusive evidence tying any suspect to the murders. Today, the investigation stands as a reminder of the lack of physical evidence complicated every step of the process. With no weapon recovered, no fingerprints preserved, and no personal belongings left at the scene, authorities were left with circumstantial leads that never fully materialized. The combination of false starts, uncooperative witnesses, and the transient nature of the location created an environment where certainty remained elusive. Today, the investigation stands as a reminder of the profound challenges law enforcement faces in cases where victims are marginalized and evidence is scarce. Despite decades of inquiry, the murders remain unsolved, and the identity of the killer is still unknown. Barbara was last seen on October 17, 2006, leaving the duplex on North Lafayette Avenue in Ventnor, New Jersey. She had been staying there with her friend Lori and Lori's father, a modest home that had offered her temporary shelter. That brief sighting would become the final confirmed moment of her life. From that day forward, Barbara disappeared without explanation, vanishing from the view of both her family and friends. In the weeks that followed, no one heard from her. Phone calls went unanswered, and there were no indications of her usual movement between Atlantic City streets and the small circle of acquaintances she trusted. For those who knew her well, the silence was deeply uncharacteristic. Barbara, though struggling with her instability, rarely severed all contact for such a long stretch of time. This absence grew increasingly concerning, yet there were no immediate clues to explain where she had gone or whom she might have been with. Her body was discovered on November 20th, more than a month after she was last seen. Found along the marshy road behind the Golden Key Motel, her fate became intertwined with 3 other women, each of whom had similarly vanished under mysterious circumstances. The timeline suggested Barbara had been targeted soon after her disappearance, but investigators were unable to reconstruct her final hours in detail. Like the others, Barbara's vulnerabilities shaped the tragedy. Her addiction and reliance on survival sex work placed her in an environment where exploitation was constant and danger was close. Whoever ended her life likely recognized these circumstances, using them to gain access and opportunity. Her disappearance fit within the broader pattern that marked all 4 victims. Lives pushed to society's margins and endings left without resolution. Barbara's story is inseparable from the experiences of the 3 other women found behind the Golden Key Motel: Molly Dilts, Tracy Roberts, and Kim Raffo. While their ages and backgrounds differed, certain patterns emerged across their lives. Each had faced significant personal losses, navigating hardships that left them vulnerable in both emotional and practical ways. Addiction was a common thread, shaping daily decisions and affecting their capacity to maintain stable living conditions. All 4 women had engaged in survival sex work, a choice born less from desire or more from necessity. Economic hardship and substance dependence intersected, compelling them to navigate environments fraught with danger. These circumstances not only increased their exposure to potential predators, but also created situations where assistance or intervention was scarce. Friends and family members described their struggles with a combination of concern and helplessness, noting the challenges of providing support in an environment dominated by drugs and precarious work. Toxicology reports later revealed that each victim had substances in their systems that likely contributed to their incapacitation. Investigators theorized that whoever targeted them may have exploited these dependencies, using drugs to gain control before committing murder. The similarities in circumstances, substance use, reliance on sex work, and social marginalization provided a framework for understanding how all 4 women became targets. This section highlights the broader societal and structural vulnerabilities that shaped the victims' lives. Beyond individual choices, systemic factors such as poverty, addiction, and limited social support created conditions in which harm became more probable. By examining these shared vulnerabilities, the case illustrates not only the personal tragedies of Barbara, Molly, Tracy, and Kim, but also the ways in which Atlantic City's underworld provided both opportunity and concealment for violence. Their lives, while distinct, were bound by circumstances that increased their exposure to danger and ultimately placed them in the path of a predator. The discovery of 4 bodies in a drainage ditch behind the Golden Key Motel sent shockwaves out through Atlantic City in November 2006. For weeks, the seaside community was gripped by fear, especially among women working on the streets who recognized the dangers of their environment reflected in the fate of the victims. Conversations spread quickly, with many acknowledging that the killings underscored risks long known but rarely addressed. What was once whispered fear now became undeniable reality. Despite the initial attention, the case stalled almost as quickly as it began. Investigators struggled to identify reliable witnesses, while forensic evidence proved limited due to the condition and location of the bodies. Without leads, speculation circulated, but concrete answers remained absent. The early momentum diminished, and over time, public awareness faded, leaving families to continue their search for truth in near isolation. For Barbara's sister Valerie and her daughter Dominique, the loss carried an especially heavy weight. Valerie became a determined advocate, speaking publicly in hopes of keeping Barbara's memory alive while pressing for answers. Dominique, still young, faced the grief of losing her mother while navigating life defined by absence. Their experiences mirrored those of the other families, each struggling with grief, unanswered questions, and the challenge of memorializing loved ones whose final days were marked by tragedy. Authorities repeatedly stressed that the Golden Key Motel murders bore no connection to Rex Heuermann, the man charged decades later in the Gilgo Beach killings. Despite speculation in media circles, law enforcement maintained a clear distinction between the two cases. The Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office continues to encourage anyone with information to come forward, emphasizing that even the smallest lead could help unravel the mystery. As years pass, the case remains unsolved, leaving an enduring legacy of unanswered questions. The victims were more than statistics or cautionary tales tied to addiction and prostitution. They were mothers who loved their children, daughters connected to families, and sisters who shared bonds of care. Each woman carried unrealized potential, abruptly silenced by violence. Their stories remind us that behind headlines and police reports are human lives, each cut short in ways that demand remembrance. The unsolved murders behind the Golden Key Motel remain part of Atlantic City's hidden history, a chilling reminder of vulnerability, violence, and justice deferred. The call for answers continues, driven not only by investigators, but by families who refuse to let memory fade, insisting that these women be remembered as more than victims,